here to really talk about deep tech, and I think it was fantastic to see the energy around deep tech here in the event. And I want to thank the Kerala Startup Mission to inviting me to come here and talk about the subject as well. Now, in terms of leadership talk, get the presentation up. Thank you. And the way I would like to structure this is really to talk about, I know everybody talks about deep tech. The question is, what is deep tech? And I think deep tech is really, is defined by research-driven companies, the process of the research itself actually sometimes creates the company. And then that gets converted into a product that then comes to market. But the gestation period for deep tech is fairly long, and it takes a number of years from the time the research gets started to the time actually a product shows up in the market. What I want to do today is really kind of lay out the opportunity for deep tech and how possibly Kerala can participate in it. But really this is a national agenda, and given the energy of the startup ecosystem here in Kerala and the already a fair amount of startups which are looking at these kind of domains, it becomes really a critical piece for us to take forward as part of a partnership. And I'm glad to report that NASSCOM is a key partner of the Kerala Startup Mission, has been for many years, and will continue to deepen this partnership as we look at deep tech. Now, when you look at the deep tech ecosystem today, out of about 27,000 tech startups in India, and these are startups across various kinds of tech domains, about 3,200, around between 3,000 to 3,500 startups are what you would characterize the way I defined deep tech. Now, the important part here is these companies have a very different set of approaches, needs, as well as the way they're very IP driven. So intellectual property is a key element of how these companies get built over time. Now, when you look at the opportunity of what is happening in the deep tech space, there are four major trends that I would like to talk about. One is the fact that the trend is moving towards rapid growth. So we see within the tech ecosystem, one of the fastest growing elements is deep tech, and across various verticals. This is not any one vertical, but they are across all verticals. Of course, AI is, over the last year, has really taken off. But a lot of companies were already using AI, but with generative AI, the last year's dialogue has shifted considerably. So even if you leave alone generative AI for a second, there is still a rapid amount of growth in health tech companies, in mobility companies, electric companies, etc. And this is only accelerating. The second is, like I mentioned, the creation of the company is built around research, so in cutting edge areas. So whether it be, there's so many examples across the board, whether it's in agri-tech, health tech, and so on. So many different kinds of cutting edge technologies are getting created as part of the process. We believe that within the next, by 2030, there'll probably be over 10,000 deep tech startups from India. And, there's an opportunity here for Kerala to play a big role in this. And many of these companies haven't been created yet. So I think the opportunity is only big and getting bigger. And last but not least, this cuts across a number of sectors, whether it be in health, like I mentioned, whether it be in mobility, industrial, IoT kind of companies which are incorporating a lot more deep tech and moving things forward. So the key growth areas are based on a wide variety of sectors, and that is really where the biggest opportunity really comes in to make a difference. Now, when you talk about deep tech startups, there are four major demands, if I look at the challenges and as we look at the larger opportunity and challenges that are coming up. The first thing for startups is patient capital. The kind of capital that is required to take research cannot be something that an institutional investor like a VC or a PE will actually fund in the early stages of the company. This capital has to come from government, and this is another opportunity. I know there's a lot of investment that Kerala government is doing in the startup ecosystem, but creating a fund which is very specifically for deep tech is being thought of at of course, the national level, under the Principal Scientific Advisor's Office, which is part of the Prime Minister's Principal Scientific Advisor. They're creating an NRF fund which is likely to be about 50,000 crores. Now you need money like that. I mean, just to give you an example, some of the companies, if you look at a comparative company in the US, many of them are raising $10 to $50 million or more in early capital from various kinds of foundations and various kind of grants. We almost need to get there, similar kind of scale to do this. 1 crore grant is not going to cut it for deep tech. So we are going to have to look for sources of funding that can actually help these companies in the early stages. And then follow it up with institutional investments that will come from PEs and VCs once they have a product in market and they need to scale it up. The second is, how do we build partnerships of industry and academia research that can be much more effective than it is today? Today, of course, there are some good examples that have come up from IITs and IISc in Bangalore, etc. But we need to broad base this. There needs to be a lot more industry academia orientation, not just for the research part, which of course is very critical to bring things to market, but also on the talent part, because talent that is required for the future of deep tech is going to be very different than what we have used to in the past. So we're going to need a lot more people who are coming from scientific domains, from other many different engineering disciplines in order to make these companies happen. And then, of course, go to market and everything else that startups need to make their companies successful. The second is around talent. I mentioned that, but I think talent needs for deep tech is going to look very different. In the last few decades, a lot of our focus has been on IT and software development. But as we look ahead, we are going to need people with health tech backgrounds. We have a number of doctors who are now turning into entrepreneurs in the health tech space, etc. And so the kind of talent that we are going to need in the future is going to look very different. The third area is around market access. One of the things that deep tech companies run into is regulatory challenges. It's not just in India, but overseas markets. As they try to go global, if you're a health tech company, you have to pass the FDA regulations in the US in order for you to go to market. So the regulatory aspect, regulatory environment, how do we make it smoother is going to be a key need as we look ahead. And then, of course, discovery. How do analysts who track this space are very different? How do we get in front of them? How do they find these companies? How do they take these companies forward? The third area is around go-to-market, is around supply chain. The deep tech companies, in many cases, are hardware, software, kind of companies. And for that, the supply chain is not necessarily all available in India. So this is a little different than pure software companies, which didn't have to worry about supply chain. But in deep tech, supply chain becomes a very key element. And one of the things we need to do is, how do we discover the supply chain? Of course, deepen it in India itself. So there's a lot more dependency can be reduced from an overseas import perspective. But certain things you may not be able to get because of whether it is certain kinds of technologies or certain kind of raw materials which are not available in India, just because it's not here. So I think the supply chain management, supply chain understanding is going to become a very key element of what is required for deep tech. Now, the last but not least is policy. As I mentioned, the Principal Scientific Advisor's Office of the PMO is starting to look at this really, so they have a national deep tech report, deep tech, that is policy, that is very close to getting finalized. It's been out for consultation for some time now, and it is getting close to getting launched. But I would encourage from a state government perspective to also look at this, because we need the support, we need policies similar to how every state government, and Kerala state government has been a leader in this, in looking at policy development for the various sectors. I think for deep tech, a policy in alignment with the national policy is going to be very critical to support and give an impetus to startups from this space. There are, from a recommendations perspective from NASSCOM, I think there are about 7 areas that we are looking at, and this is an alignment with the national deep tech policy. The first is funding, and I talked about this. How do we open up funding, not just from research grants, but also institutional capital that has to come from VCs and PE who are willing to have patient capital available, because the return on these typically these are B2B companies, and return on the investment is going to take longer than what people are used to. But last but not least, I was happy to see SBI on the stage today, because there is also going to be debt financing that is going to be required by these companies, especially in manufacturing. as they look ahead and how they actually grow. Second is government procurement. I think government is still the largest customer in India, whether it be in defense or whether in other sectors. So I think government procurement policies for deep tech, where it may eases the way in which companies can actually get discovered and used and government becomes a customer is very critical. Third is talent. I talked about it. Fourth is R&D innovation. R&D in India is still a very small percentage of our GDP. If you look at R&D investments across the board, it's 0.6% of GDP, of which about 0.5% is done by government. So there is an opportunity here for all sizes of companies to start investing more in R&D. And the question is, and how do we take that, start to deepen it? So at some point, we are in double-digit R&D investment as a country. Sectoral bottlenecks, I talked about the fact that regulatory environment is a very critical piece to overcome. Policies, and then hardware ecosystem. I think hardware ecosystem is an interesting one because I think there's an opportunity here for every state to participate. And Kerala has been ahead of other states in terms of being focused on these kinds of companies and probably understands and how do we bring it forward. Now, I just want to spend a few minutes on NASSCOM and why NASSCOM is taking an interest in this. Over the last 20 years, we have had a big focus in terms of how do we look at these areas. And I'll talk about that in the next slide again, but the four major areas in alignment with the four areas I talked about that we are focused on. One is around deep tech capital access. To that end, we are building a whole range of partnerships, and I'll talk about it at the end in terms of if there's anybody in the room who would like to participate with us on this, you're more than welcome. We're building these strategic partnerships. We are working with the government on policy, and we'd love to work with Kerala government as well on the policy front. And then deep tech mentoring program. We have a deep tech club where we have over 200 mentors. I know there's a very strong mentorship ecosystem here in Kerala, and we would love to have many of your mentors participate with us in the long term. If I look back, I mentioned over the last 20 years, NASSCOM has built a whole set of assets in the product space. We've been focused on tech product growth in the country over the last 20 years, and we have had a number of flagship programs that we have launched over these times. I like to call it the string of pearls, one of which was the NASSCOM Product Conclave, which is in its 20th year. We had the conference last week, which was attended by over 2,000 people over 2 days, talking only deep tech. So one of the things we have done is we have taken our learnings over the last 20 years, focused it on deep tech, and we are saying deep tech is the future. We are putting all our wood behind it. In fact, I chair what used to be called the NASSCOM Product Council, which today is called the NASSCOM Deep Tech Council. So deep tech is a big focus for us. And NASSCOM, given our position in the ecosystem as an industry body, we have always been a credible voice for the ecosystem, and we'll continue to do that for deep tech. And within deep tech, NASSCOM has built another set of assets over the last, I would say 14, 15 years, that has touched about 1,000 deep tech startups. A couple of them I'll point out. The NASSCOM 10,000 Startup Program, I see a lot of companies here who have been part of that. We are going to make that much more focused on deep tech. We started something called a NASSCOM Deep Tech Club about 6 years ago in 2017, when nobody was talking deep tech. And at that time, since that time, we have one of the largest cohorts of deep tech companies under our umbrella with over 300 of them across many sectors. We have a very deep mentoring program and a support program for both Enterprise Connect and Investor Connect as part of these programs. And that in that journey, we have touched over 1,000 companies. Last week, we announced a set of partnerships with institutional investors and other mentorship platforms. We would like to deepen this. And if there's anybody in the room who is interested in joining us, I'll have an email up for a second. And I have one of my colleagues from NASSCOM here, Sharon, who's part of the Kerala startup mission, part of NASSCOM startups based here in Kerala. I know he's very plugged into the ecosystem here, and he can take it forward if you're interested. We also announced our Emerge 50 winners last year. This is a program that has been going on for 14 years. And during that time, we have had well over 5,000 companies who have been part of Emerge 50. And every year we announce a league of 50 companies, and of which top 10. And I'm happy to report that, this year's edition, We had about 750 startups. About 10% of that were from Kerala in terms of people who had applied. And I think one of the League of 10 is here from a Kerala-based startup. But this has been a flagship program for us, and it's a mechanism for discovery. I talked about the fact that startups need to be found, and Emerge 50 has proved this. And over the years, over the last 14 years, 10 of our companies which were discovered in the very early stages of the company went on to become unicorns. So the Emerge 50, the process is very rigorous, and if you've been selected as a top 50 company, then I think the bragging rights belongs to the company at that point in time. This is my last slide. I just wanted to thank all of you for being here and giving me a platform to speak on this topic. I have an email here, nehal@nascom.in or sharon@nascom.in. Both of them can help you connect to us. And if you're interested in joining us as part of this journey, please reach out. And I'm looking forward to having a lot more people, both companies and mentors and others who really would like to support the larger ecosystem for deep tech going forward. Thank you.